What's up, sports fans? It's time for Let Me Speak. I'm Joe Braverman, and on this show, we discuss the big news in the world of sports as heard from me, myself, and I. Here's what we'll be talking about this week. Down to the Final Four, a look back in the MLB Divisional Series, and a look ahead to the LCS. Plus, in a week of upsets, were there any changes in the top and bottom 10 NFL power rankings? And we preview the Bruins' upcoming season with a special guest. You're listening to episode 90 of Let Me Speak. Let's get it started. Intro.
Let me speak.
What is going on, everybody? Coming at you on Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. We're making a landmark episode right here. This is number 90. 90 episodes of Let Me Speak. That means the countdown is on to 100. We are so close to 100. Now I'm getting very, very excited for it. But for right now, let's go right now with episode 90. We've got a really good show, good episode coming up for you. We got another set of NFL power rankings coming up. We've got some quick hits we got to get to. And then, of course, the great Bridgette Proulx from WEEI joins the show to talk a little bit of Bruins as the season gets underway. But we're going to start in the MLB, obviously, because playoffs are getting that much more intense. We are on the League Championship Series now after what I would call some shocking upsets in the league divisional series. The Orioles, who won 101 games, the 100-win Dodgers, the 104-win Braves, they're all gone out from the playoffs. And before we get to the LCS, I want to reflect on that LDS and everything that's really gone on in the playoffs. You know, when you put those three teams together along with the Tampa Bay Rays, who won 99 games, they went a combined 1-10 for a record. So it wasn't even a competitive series. They were just all completely outmatched. You know, the Braves were able to win that one game because of a wild double play and a Bryce Harper base running mistake. So it's brought up the conversation of does the playoffs, do they need to be refined? Does there need to be some sort of refined schedule or a new format? And honestly, I like the format of how it is, with having one team get the bye and then everyone else playing in a best 2 out of 3. I think the thing that has to be refined, though, at least in that, is the scheduling part of it, because baseball it's not one of those ones where you could take a day off or another day off and get back to the way you were. The thing is, with the schedule side of things, the wild card round is a best 2 out of 3 that starts on Tuesday and ends Thursday. So those teams that have a bye, so this year it was the Orioles, the Dodgers, the Braves, and then the Astros. Those teams had to wait until Saturday. So their last game was Sunday. Then they go 6 days before they play their first postseason game. So while I'm not making any sort of excuses or whatever, it's a pattern. It's a theme that the schedule needs to be tighter. So really what I would do if I was Commissioner Rob Manfred is I would rather make the wild card game just a single game elimination the way it was. Do that. Or you have to make the start of the LDS sooner than Saturday. You have to do it maybe on a Wednesday or on a Thursday, you know, similar to how like an all-star break would be, because you can't wait that long and let those teams go cold for that long. And not only that, but those teams that get the bye, when they end their year, you know, they maybe go, depending on when they clinch, you know, 2 weeks without playing like meaningful competitive baseball. You know, it's not like the end of the wild card chases where everyone was playing until like the last week or so. So That's what I think has to be done. It's not necessarily the format, it's the schedule that's got to be tightened up. You can't have this long of a break for a team for baseball that is a daily sport. Because you ask anyone who plays regular baseball or is in any kind of league, you have multiple days off, you're already in a hole. So that's where I think the advantage was for some of these teams that won. Not making excuses, as I said, though, for the Braves, who once again fall victim to the Phillies in 4 games. And honestly, the question I had from that series was, what on earth happened to Atlanta's lineup? This was a lineup that was supposed to be insanely powerful. It's got the 40-70 guy in Acuna. He only goes 2 for 14. You have Matt Olson struggling, Austin Riley struggling. Orlando Arcia and Marcelo Zuna both went 2 for 13. A team that hit over 300 home runs in the regular season only had 3 in the series. Like, what on earth happened to Atlanta? Can you say they ran into just some really good pitching in Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola? Maybe. But still, with a lineup as deep as they were, they picked a terrible time to fall off. A terrible time to fall off. And not only that, but their starting pitching wasn't even that good either. You got to remember that they hadn't had Charlie Morton and Michael Soroka for a long time now. And really the only dependable guy they could rely on was Spencer Strider. So the rotation is not as deep as we initially thought. So, I mean, it's good that the Braves have signed all these guys to long-term deals and long-term extensions where they don't have to have this big blow up of the core or whatever. They'll probably be back in this position again next year in 2024. Not saying they're going to be winning 104 games, but they're at least going to be in the playoffs and be considered a favorite. But man, they really got to tune things up when it gets to playoff time. The Dodgers, though, I think maybe had the worst choke job because they got swept by the Diamondbacks. Okay. The Diamondbacks, who had gone, I want to say 5 years without making the postseason and have been basically like a middling team, as me and Cooper Leonard talked about a few weeks ago. Let's just put it like this. Their starting pitching was god-awful. God-awful. I mean, you had your supposed ace, who's going to the Hall of Fame, Clayton Kershaw, absolutely get lit up, didn't even get through the first inning. Yeah, Bobby Miller couldn't get through. He couldn't even get past the third. And Lance Lynn couldn't get past the third. You want to know what the combined ERA for those 3 was? The combined ERA was 45.64. That's a horrible ERA. And not only that, but similar to Atlanta, the lineup picked a terrible time to go cold. Mookie Betts 0 for 11. Max Muncy 2 for 11. JD Martinez 2 for 10. Freddie Freeman 1 for 10. That lineup was horrible. And you could say it's shocking, but that's what the Dodgers do. They have a really good regular season, and then they blow it in the postseason. This time, they get totally outmatched, and they get swept by the Arizona Diamondbacks. So, I hate to say it, but, this team is not as good as everyone thinks. They're just not. And, we know that they're going to spend some money to try and get some starting pitching. We know that for a fact. Can they do it in the postseason? We know they're going to be in the Shohei sweepstakes, but guess what? He can't pitch. And there aren't a ton of good arms out there, like an Aaron Nola or a Jordan Montgomery, who we'll talk about in a little bit. I don't see the Dodgers do it again, win again. And even as I've said, everyone's been talking about the COVID year sort of being an asterisk championship. I'm not one who's totally putting an asterisk on it, but I would love to see this Dodgers team win the whole thing under normal circumstances. That's what I would like to see, because so far they have not done that yet. Haven't done it yet. And it's kind of sad the way they just continue to choke away these playoff opportunities that they have. On the other side for the American League, though, not too shocked about the Orioles getting swept by the Rangers. Rangers were one of the top teams pretty much all year long. They're a very streaky team, but I also talked about last week the lack of postseason experience that Baltimore had. It was that they had a really, really young roster, not really a basically no playoff experience. Now that I'm thinking about it, all those guys that they have in the pitching rotation and in the lineup, not a ton of pitching rotation. Even their manager, Brandon Hyde, he's been with the team winning or losing 100 plus games for consecutive years, and now he's in this big spot in the postseason. So I think, while I'm not going to say that it's a very disappointing season, you can't be too surprised that a team that has this little experience in the postseason just get completely overmatched. Their starting rotation, Bradish, Rodriguez, and Kramer, they were overmatched by the moment as well. So I hope that the Orioles can go get a true ace and can get a really strong arm, because that's, at least on the field, what they need to do. I like their lineup. I like the young core that they have, but it's just, and they have a good bullpen as well. They have to just get a true ace and a big starting rotation. And contrary to what they've been doing for multiple years, they're going to have to go and pay for one. They really are, because they've got a really good roster right now, and I can't see them trading any of them right now. And then on the other side, the Astros taking care of the Twins. 7 straight ALCS trips for the Astros. That is very impressive. That's the modern day dynasty in the MLB, cheating or not, because they're just a team that's made for the playoffs, and especially against Minnesota, that starting pitching has looked much better than I thought. I really thought it was just going to be Justin Verlander and a bunch of guys, but Jose Urquidy, Framber Valdez, Christian Javier, it could be a different story when they have to play Texas, but at least against Minnesota, I was very impressed to see what they did. But speaking of Texas, that is where the ALCS comes down to. Arlington versus Houston, Rangers versus Astros. And all of a sudden, it's now the Rangers in command. They take the first 2 games on the road at Minute Maid Park, and now they're heading home with a 2-0 lead. And like I said about Houston starting pitching, I was impressed. I thought they looked much better than I thought, and they still do. I still think that they still look really well. I mean, even in the 2-0 loss, Justin Verlander pitched great. They just had opposing starters as well that were just that much better. When you have Jordan Montgomery going in game 1, and then Nathan Eovaldi in game 2. And now, when you go back home, game 3, you got the return of Max Scherzer, who, yes, might not be that, big-time stud ace that he once was in his Detroit days and his Washington days, but he can still be effective. And then you also have John Gray, who's been a dependable starter as well all year for Texas. So the Rangers are in a really good spot, and I trust their rotation to get things done compared to Houston's. And not only for the rotation is an issue for Houston, it's the lineup that I'm really looking at. They don't have any consistency outside of Yordan Alvarez, who, by the way, is a beast. He is a beast right now in the postseason. He's hitting .391. He's got 6 home runs and 8 RBIs. His slugging is 1.261, and his OPS is 1.701. I mean, it's getting to that point like in David Ortiz in the 2013 World Series where you don't even pitch to him. You just have to let him walk on base and make someone else beat you. But in terms of the rest of the lineup, there's no consistency. So far in the postseason, Jose Altuve is 4 for 25. Alex Bregman is 5 for 23. Kyle Tucker is 2 for 22. They don't have the dependable pieces in their lineup like they've had in years past. There was always going to be a Carlos Correa or George Springer. The lineup is just not as deep as it originally is. They keep relying on Martin Maldonado, who can't hit. You have Jeremy Pena. He's struggling as well. Chas McCormick continues to struggle. Okay. So on top of the really good starting pitching that Texas has, the lineup just cannot do anything with it. And so, not saying this just because the Rangers have a 2-0 series lead, but I was leaning towards Texas, and I thought they could get it done in 6 games. I really thought they did, just because, when I saw that Scherzer and Gray were going to be activated to the LCS roster, I looked at their rotation, I looked at the Astros rotation, and I would be picking all of those guys. if I needed a closeout game, because Nathan Eovaldi has been on fire this postseason. He's been probably one of the better postseason pitchers in recent memory. You have Jordan Montgomery, who's holding his own, and then I mentioned Scherzer and Gray. So I like Texas to come out of here and get the victory and make themselves in the World Series, which I did say when I returned to doing these podcast episodes. I initially said Texas might be that favorite. When I first did this, I thought Texas would be the favorite because you couldn't trust Tampa. Baltimore was too young, and Houston was struggling at the time. So I did, I'm not going to, pull it out during this episode right now, but I'm pretty sure that I had said Texas would be the favorite back in August. I want to say it was either July or August. I think it was one of those times where I had said that Texas, to me, would be the favorite to make the World Series. In terms of winning it, we'll have to wait and see on that one. On the other side, for the NLCS, I really see this series between the Phillies and the Diamondbacks. These are basically two teams that are almost the same, and basically have sort of the same mantras. They're kind of a scrappy team. They've got chips on their shoulders. They both made it through the wild card. Obviously, things changed with Philly taking game one 5-3. Philly taking that 1-0 lead now at home. But I will say I was, when the series initially started, I was leaning towards the Phillies. Now, I think that these are two teams that are fun to watch just because they're scrappy. All the things that I mentioned, they're almost similar to each other. The only difference is for Arizona, very little postseason experience. Similar to Baltimore. They don't have zero postseason experience, but they'll only have a little bit. Like Evan Longoria, who is past his prime. He's got the experience. Tommy Pham has had a couple of runs now and again. I mean, really the most experienced guy, one of the more experienced guys they have, is their manager, Torey Lovullo, who was the bench coach during a championship run with the Red Sox. So he has some memories. But really what I'm looking at basically is the Philly lineup versus the Arizona bullpen. I think that bullpen is really going to be tested because this Philly lineup is so dangerous. They're so dangerous, and they've been basically running through the postseason without one of their best hitters, without his power. Kyle Schwarber, in game one, hit his first home run of the playoffs. And you got to remember, this was a 40-plus home run hitter guy. He's only hitting a $178 right now. So the fact that they've been doing it without Schwarber doing that, they're relying on guys who have just been playing out of this world. Bryce Harper, 409. Trey Turner hitting 500. Nick Castellanos, 370. I mean, 10 of the 16 home runs that have been hit by the Phillies have been from these three guys. And Bryce Harper, I mean, he's a guy who is made for Philly. He's a guy who loves to compete, and he's going to be just fighting every single game. Every single game, he's putting out that effort, and he's just got that power as a left-handed hitter. I would have to favor the Phillies in this one. I think we're going to see a Rangers-Phillies World Series in 2023. That's what I think is going to happen. We'll probably know by next week. We've already got 2 games done. The ALCS game 2 is tonight. It'll already be done by the time this podcast comes out. So we could be seeing 2-0 leads. And Rangers and Phillies might be what I am expecting between these two. But I'm really looking forward to watching the LCS. I sort of like the parity. I know Philly made the World Series last year, but still, they were just a team that struggled for a while. And I want to see what Bryce Harper does. He want to get a little bit of vengeance when the Nats won the World Series in 19 without him. So we'll see what happens there. But coming up next, we're going to dive into some football and get to our second top 10 and bottom 10 power rankings. Were there any changes? You'll find out right after this. So now we're going to move from baseball to football. Last week, we revealed our first ever top 10 and bottom 10 power rankings in the NFL. That's where we looked at the top 10 teams in the league and the bottom 10 teams in the league. So here is edition number 2 coming off of week 6. And number 10 is going to be a little bit shocking, but considering what they did this past Sunday against a really tough opponent, you have to put the Cleveland Browns at number 10, especially with how tight the AFC North is. I mean, the fact that they held a high-powered 49ers team to only 17 points. And yes, they won on a lucky missed field goal from Jake Moody. The defense is legit. The Cleveland Browns defense is legit if they're only allowing 215 yards and 17 points to the 49ers. This is the best defense statistically in yards allowed in football. They were only allowing 200 yards per game. Now, this probably will change considering how much of a struggle it has been for the offense. Obviously, if you're starting PJ Walker, a lifelong backup and a former XFL guy, you know that's going to be a big issue. But it's been the run game that they leaned on. Even without Nick Chubb, you got guys like Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt still making progress in that run game. I mean, they put up 160 rush yards. And you got to remember, the San Francisco D-line, Armstead, Hargrave, Bosa, they've got some big bodies there. And still, they were able to put up 160 rush yards. This is statistically the 4th best rushing team in the NFL. And if they can keep that up and even get competency from Deshaun Watson when he comes back, if he can give them that kind of flexibility, then this Browns team can shock some people. Do I expect it to happen? Probably not. I don't really expect it to happen, but hey, let's enjoy Cleveland while they're in a top 10 of anything. A top 10 of everything. Let's give them a nice little applause for that one, because I don't think they're going to last that far. We are in the middle of bye weeks. Keep that in mind. Number 9, I am going to put the Baltimore Ravens there. They were there last week. They go into London, and they beat the Titans 23-16. This is just a standard performance by Baltimore, and more so my concern is just their long-term game. You know, from week to week, it's still, you know, we know what it's going to be. Lamar Jackson's only going to put up about 200-something yards passing. He's going to rush for 40 or 50, or maybe even has to be the leading rusher like he was this past week with 62 yards. So I still am on the side of that is not the formula for success. But at least for a regular season kind of thing, when it's early on, it's only week 6, you can still win some games that way. I still just don't want my quarterback getting as many rushes as the lead back, because like Lamar's career has been, he's been an injured guy. He always injures his ankle or his knee. So he has to rely more on his arm. So the fact that he went 21 of 30 for 223 yards is standard for him. Throwing a pick, he's got to do better at that. But he's got to rely more on his arm if the Ravens are going to have sustained success. That's why I can't move the Ravens right now where they are at number 9. What I can do is sing the praises of the number 8 team, and that's the Jaguars. I said this team last week is legit. And yes, they always have their way with the Colts, just like they did this past week, 37-20. And I raved about their offense, how well they were. Yes, the offense struggled, but they got really good field position, which is why they were able to put up all those points. Because this week, in their victory against the Colts, was all about defense, getting those turnovers. They pick off Gardner Minshew 3 times. They force a fumble from him. And now there are some names that you're going to have to really pay attention to. Foyesade Oluokun. I had to do that a couple of times. He's the 3rd leading tackler in football. Josh Allen, the defensive guy, is tied for 3rd in sacks in the NFL. Darius Williams and Andre Sisco each have 3 interceptions. The only concern, at least for the Jaguars D, is that pass defense. You know, are they going to rely too much on these ball hawking, forcing turnovers kind of way? Because you got to remember, they did allow 310 yards of passing yards compared to 44 rush yards from Indy. So that is the minimal concern with Jacksonville. But I still think this is a team to be reckoned with, because now they've got the great weapons on offense who might not get it done every week. They now have a defense that can back them up for sure. Number 7, I'm going to make a little bit of a change here from last week's ranking. 7, I am going with the Cowboys, who squeaked out a victory on Monday night over the Chargers 20-17. And that's why I say it, squeaking. This offense they're very hit and miss. They're very inconsistent. Dak Prescott can have a really great game or it can have a really struggling game. Offense was okay. They were okay. They didn't have any turnovers and didn't have any crucial mistakes. The defense, though, I really kept my eyes on because they have been hurting since Travion Diggs' injury. I mean, they have been struggling. You saw the way the Chargers were able to move up on the ball, and really the Chargers did it to themselves. The fact that they weren't able to get into the game. So that's why you can't really buy in with the Cowboys right now, because that defense has been hurting so much since maybe the best cornerback in the league is out for the season with the injury. And I did have to move them a step back because of the new number 6 team and how well they did this past Sunday. That's the Detroit Lions, sitting now at 5-1. Not just winning against the Bucs, but dominating over the Bucs. 20-6 was the final score. Obviously, they weren't distracted by those light orange creamsicle Tampa Bay jerseys, not at all. And now they're on a 4-game winning streak. And really, I got to give much credit to Jared Goff. I continue to say that over and over. I'm impressed with the turnaround that he's had from his last days in LA to now this new era with Detroit, especially the way the offense had to play without Jahmyr Gibbs, who wasn't playing, and then David Montgomery, who left in the middle of the game. Goff had to do more, and step up he did. 30-44, 353 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I mean, what a performance it was from Jared Goff. And then for Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know he got 12 of those for 124 yards and a touchdown, but I would be very surprised if he doesn't get all pro votes. And quite honestly, like if Detroit keeps this up, even if they I don't have their schedule memorized. I know next week they're going to Baltimore. I think that's going to be another big game. If they keep doing this, I might have to keep moving them up and up and up because this team is just so much fun to watch, especially with the kind of culture that Dan Campbell has brought in there. They just have a lot of guys that are able to buy into his message. So I like the Lions, and I expect them maybe to move up a little bit in the rankings. Number 5, I think I'm going to have to leave the Dolphins here at number 5, strictly because of who they played. I mean, last week they beat the Giants easily. This week they beat the Panthers easily. You got to remember the Panthers are winless. But really, at least for me, they needed this as a get-right game, just to remind everyone how dangerous they can be. You got to keep in mind, of the 424 total yards they got, they averaged 6.5 per play. 6.5. You got to remember, this offense for Miami is built on speed, and Tua just has to find these guys. You find Jalen Waddle. You give the ball to Tyreek Hill. You force it into his hands. And Tyreek only had to catch 6 times to get 163 yards and a touchdown, and which, by the way, I have a little bit of an issue with his side celebrations on these touchdowns, just grabbing someone's phone, doing a backflip. I have an issue with that. I'm not really a big fan of that. But along with the speed, now there are no issues in the running back game because you're thinking, oh, with Devin Achane now on IR, he's missing 4 games. What do you do? Guess what? You have Raheem Mostert, who you thought was going to be your top option. He goes back into the lead way. He rushes 17 times for 115 and 2 touchdowns. And he gets 3 catches for 17 yards and a touchdown as well. So the Dolphins continue to be a high-powered offense. Like I had said a couple of weeks ago, the gut check games are going to be when they play the Eagles and when they play the Chiefs. Next week, we get to see it on Sunday night when they play Philly. Defensively, are they going to be able to stop Philly? Offensively, can they carve up the Eagles defense? We'll have to wait and see. But if the Dolphins do win that game, I'm definitely going to have to move them up in the rankings. Number 2, the 4th team, the second one, number 2 in the division of the AFC East right now is the Bills, which is who I'm putting at number 4 because they squeak out a victory versus the New York Giants. And really, I put them there over the Dolphins because, again, I look at the Dolphins opponent, but I look at the Bills, and everything just looked off. They looked off for Buffalo. And yes, Josh Allen made some mistakes. He had a really bad interception. He could have put the game away if he connected with Dawson Knox in that fourth quarter. And luckily, they maybe got away with a couple of calls, especially on that goal line. And plus, yeah, a bunch of goal line mistakes from the Giants themselves. But similar to the Cowboys, defense and injuries continues to be the big issues. You got to remember, this is a Giants offense that didn't have their starting quarterback. They were starting Tyrod Taylor, maybe one of the weakest offensive lines. And they allowed 317 yards to the Giants. Okay, so that's a little bit concerning. And again, it's injuries, injuries, injuries. How can Buffalo stay healthy? And especially now that they're one game back of the Dolphins, it's time for them to kick in the gear. I mean, yes, they have a nice, easy week next week against the Patriots, or so we think. But they got to get their defense together. They got to get that. They got to get everybody on the same page and try and get back to that dominant phase they once were. Moving into the top three, I have to move the Eagles back at number 3, ahead of number 2 from where they were last week. Because let's face it, 20-14 loss to the Jets. They're no longer undefeated. And my suspicions about their lack of dominance officially came true. I mean, Jalen Hurts against that Jets defense looked a little bit lifeless. I mean, yes, they moved the ball down the field, but again, they had red zone struggles. 3 interceptions from Jalen Hurts and 4 turnovers total from the Eagles. I mean, we saw A.J. Brown have a great day, but the Jets just made the Eagles look pedestrian. They really did. And the fact that for a Jets offense that struggled the way they did, for the Eagles to let them get 20 points on the board is kind of concerning. And you would think that this should be an easy game. Maybe they're overlooking the Jets and looking ahead to that Sunday night game against the Dolphins. I ultimately think that's what happened, is they were kind of overlooking the Jets and saw, oh, we got the 5-1 Dolphins coming up on Sunday Night Football. We got to pay more attention to them than we do with the Jets. And sure enough, the defense for New York was just able to feast on Philadelphia. So that loss vaults them back to number 3 and puts Kansas City at number 2. I'm putting the Chiefs at number 2. I can't put them at number 1 just because, again, the opponent that they faced and the fact that they struggled against them 19-8. I was listening to the game on WEEI. I was listening to Westwood One's coverage of Broncos and Chiefs, and Tony Baselli, the color guy, he said that, maybe Kansas City was overthinking things, or they were trying to get too cute. I mean, they had the fake field goal play, and then they had a couple of third down opportunities. But I'm not too concerned about how they performed. I mean, yes, they went 4 of 13 on third down, and they went 1 of 5 in the red zone. I think that's just because they're sort of trying some new things out. I knew they could kind of have their way with Denver. I think the concerns still stay the same, getting a rushing attack balanced out with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, 96 rush yards compared to 293 pass yards. Penalties as well are an issue. They're still top 10 in penalties called against them. And then you have Patrick Mahomes, who had to throw it 40 times. Yes, he went 30 of 40, and he threw for over 300 yards. He also had a really bad pick. I mean, he was just scrambling, and he tried to make too much happen, essentially. So I think this was sort of a game that, yes, they won, but they were sort of getting in their own way, where it could have been, if they just stuck to what they knew well, with Mahomes continuing to find Kelsey and not trying to get too cute, they probably could have had a bigger win than this. And maybe if they had a bigger win, they'd go to number 1. But unfortunately, I have to keep number 1 the same, and I'm putting San Fran there, even though they lost to the Cleveland Browns 19-17. I propped up the Browns defense as well. That's for one thing. I would say if not for an Eagles loss, they still might not be at the top. There were a couple of factors into this. Obviously, Jake Moody missing the game winner. They also had a ton of injuries. Debo left, Christian McCaffrey left, Trent Williams was banged up. So it was the tough defense, the almost come from behind win. They could have won on the final play, and then injuries. Those are the sort of things I'm looking at. I mean, let's face it, Brock Purdy had his worst game of his career, and his first ever regular season loss. I mean, the way that defense shut him down, 12 of 27 for $125, a touchdown and a pick. And then on the other side of the ball for San Fran with their defense, they forced turnovers like they do, but surprisingly struggled in Cleveland moving down the ball. They allowed 334 yards to the Browns. And keep in mind, they averaged 278, which is still top 3 in the league. So I guess it was just something about the day, maybe similar to the Eagles overlooking the Browns and looking more at the Vikings on Monday Night Football. That could be something to watch for. But I think the injuries and the fact that it was the very last play of the game, they could have won it. It lets me keep them there at number 1. So sorry, Chiefs fans, but you might have to wait another week to get into number 1. So that's what I see in the top 10. As always, let me know in the comments, anything like that about what I might have missed in the top 10. In the bottom 10, meanwhile, as I said, they might not be moving anytime soon. I feel bad for putting this team at number 10, even though they were on a bye week, but the Packers at number 10, even though they had a bye week, I think just everyone else above them had a better week. I mean, you had a Jets win. You had the Giants play tough. You had the Commanders win a game. The Commanders were sitting at number 9, and they were doing well. The Saints are going through some injuries. The Bucks are sort of coming back down to earth. So everyone just above them kind of had a better week. I think we'll get a better sense on where the Packers are this week when they play the Broncos in Denver at 1-5. If they lose the game, we might have to move them a little bit further down the list. But if they win, they might be able to get out of that number 10 spot. It's just kind of a wait and see with Jordan Love and that team. But number 9, I would call this the most significant jump, and that would be the Jets taking down the Eagles. As I mentioned, that Jets defense was really, really good against Philly. And what we've seen in the last 2 weeks is kind of what we expected going into the season. We had expectations that this defense can back up Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers just has to be, he doesn't even have to be the same MVP level that he was. He just had to be better and more competent than Zach Wilson. And so this defense against maybe one of the more powerful offenses in Philly, take away the ball 40 times. They allow a heavily run team in Philly, and they only allow 80 yards. And keep in mind, their pass D was without Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. So the fact that they only gave up 2 touchdowns to Philly, very, very impressive. Now, the offense is still an issue. That's why, Zach Wilson, he didn't lose the game. He didn't make silly mistakes. Yes, he was sacked for 5 times. And yes, they were 2 of 11 on third down. But he was 19 of 33, and he didn't throw a pick. That's all they need from Zach Wilson. If Wilson can play a little bit better, then you might see him get out of this bottom 10 rankings. But the offense still, to me, remains an issue, which is why the Jets are still on these bottom 10 rankings. But they did make a jump. They got back to number 9 rather than getting closer and closer to the bottom. Number 8, I have to put Minnesota here. They got back on track and they won against the lowly Chicago Bears. But as expected, Minnesota's offense really struggled without Justin Jefferson. Okay. 220 total yards. Kirk Cousins only had 181. He fumbled twice. He lost one of them. They were 2 of 13 on third down. I mean, let's just face it. This defense goes nowhere without Justin Jefferson. And I mentioned week after week that Kirk Cousins just can't make the big plays. I mean, luckily he gets bailed out by his own defense and Jordan Hicks getting a 42-yard scoop and score. Luckily he bails him out there, which is why I still don't have a ton of faith in the Vikings. And I think, I would not be surprised if they absolutely get steamrolled on Monday night against the 49ers. They're just lucky that they played the Bears and were able to sneak a victory away at 19-13. Number 7, though, I'm putting a new team in here. I'm putting the Tennessee Titans at number 7 right now, just because of not only, their 2-4 record, but now they've got a ton of issues at quarterback. I mean, I didn't have enough hope with them with Ryan Tannehill anyway, but now Tannehill has a high ankle sprain. They're going to have to turn to Malik Willis, who obviously they didn't have faith in. Otherwise, they wouldn't have drafted Will Levis. So kind of similar to what the Patriots are going through. Tannehill is their best option, but he's not a good option right now. Tannehill is outside the top 20 in pass yards. He's 23rd. He's got 2 touchdowns to 6 picks. You got to keep in mind, only three other guys have more interceptions than Ryan Tannehill. That's Jimmy G, Jalen Hurts, who threw 3 this past week, and Mac Jones, who continues to struggle. Even with Tannehill, this is the 4th worst passing offense. It can't be Derrick Henry because obviously, as we see, running backs continue to deteriorate and slow down, and that's exactly what's happening to Henry. He's still a force, but he's not the same force that he once was. And if you don't have a cornerback who's slinging the ball, then you're kind of screwed. So I hate to say it, but I think Tennessee is going to stay in this bottom 10 for a long time, maybe for the rest of the year. Number 6, I do have to make a little bit of movement here. I have to put the Broncos at number 6, even though they lost on Thursday night. They did lose to the Chiefs. It was just a matter of looking respectable, and I think they did, considering all the other teams that had lost. It was a respectable performance. And Russell Wilson just continues to be an issue for Denver. Sometimes it's either one or the other. It's either Sean Payton struggles or Russell Wilson struggle. Last week in their Jets loss, it was Russell Wilson. This week, again, Russell Wilson. Only went 13 of 22 for 95 yards, 2 picks, and he was sacked 4 times. Yes, he had a touchdown in there, but we're talking about the negatives for Russell Wilson. So, honestly, I don't know what more Sean Payton can do. I have no idea what more he can do. He's going to have to basically have a one-on-one with Russell Wilson and saying, get your head out of your you-know-what and just go play quarterback. I mean, we saw a couple of times, or at least I saw during that Thursday night game, he had some vintage moments where he escapes the pockets and he's running around. He can do that. He doesn't have sort of that same speed that he used to have in his Seattle days, but he can still manage to get guys open. It's just these bad mistakes that he continues to make that just continues to haunt him and the entire Denver Broncos, considering how much they put into him to be the next guy at quarterback. So I don't know what more to say about the Broncos. I don't think it's going to get any better from here. Number 5, I am going to put the Cardinals here. They did go down a spot because they just did not look good against the LA Rams, even though it was a divisional opponent. I said last week, this is a scrappy team. It was kind of fun to watch, but now they're just coming back down to earth. And really the big key from this past week was no James Conner. I mean, not having him on the field was clearly evident. The fact that their quarterback, Josh Dobbs, was their leading rusher, and he only rushed 7 times for 47 yards. So, Damian Williams and all these other guys, they just couldn't do it. They don't have enough weapons on defense. Joshua Dobbs is having to do too much. He threw 41 times. He had an interception and a fumble. So I hate to say it, but you're kind of waiting for Kyler Murray. You're just like, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Because this team just doesn't have it. They do not have it at all. Number 4 on the bottom 10, I'm going to put the Bears. I'm going to put the Chicago Bears in this one. They lose to the Vikings, and now things get worse because Justin Fields dislocates his thumb. First off, it's not like they were great beforehand. Before he got hurt, Fields was 6 of 10 for 58. He had a pick and he was sacked 4 times. Okay. So it wasn't like it was any better. So it's just only going to get worse for Chicago. I think we got to start learning the name Tyson Bagent because he's going to be the guy going forward. And I'm sorry, but Chicago's not going anywhere, even if they had Justin Fields completely healthy. So nothing more needs to be said about that one. Number 3, I want to spend some time on, and that's the I'm putting the Giants here. I thought they showed a lot of fight, that even without Daniel Jones, they were 1 play away. And you have to remember, this is why Tyrod Taylor's a backup, because at the end of the first half, when you have 1st and goal, 12 seconds and no timeouts, you don't choose to run the ball. You don't audible into a run. And then even so, you have to get your guys much, much quicker and organized. So it's clear why Brian Daboll laid into him, because I would have too. And then on the last untimed down, he goes for the floater. And yes, Darren Waller had his fingertips on it. And yes, there probably should have been a flag thrown. But even still, the fact that it wasn't executed, I still give him props for fighting against the tough Bills team. And we saw the difference in Saquon Barkley. He returned to the lineup, and we saw how much of a difference he is on offense. He's a huge difference. I mean, 24 rushes for 93 yards. Yes, he doesn't help with the red zone issues. The fact that the Giants went 0 for 5, but Saquon's going to be big if the Giants want to turn this thing around at any point. And then you have a defense that just continues to look at the offense and be like, help, help, help. Look at what we're doing to the Bills. We're holding them scoreless for 3 quarters, and you guys can't do anything out there. I mean, I would be frustrated if I was a defender for the Giants too. But they have the Commanders, and I think, they have an opportunity. They've got a good defense. If that offense can take away those boneheaded mistakes and the offensive line just stays manageable, then I think there's a shot. Number 2, I'm putting the Patriots here. Things looked better, but it's still a struggle for that offense. They lose to the Raiders 21-17. I'm very interested to find this out, that this is the worst start for the Patriots since 1995. That's a long time ago. So I think as a Patriots fan, I got to start getting used to that. But we'll get into the Patriots a little bit later. Number 1, we got to put the Panthers in there. Still the only winless team in the NFL at over 6. They get blown away again, this time by the Dolphins. It's the second straight week that they allowed 42 points. Honestly, nothing has changed. And I think the bye week couldn't have come at a better time. Bryce Young gets a nice reset because, let's face it, he hasn't lost this much since his time at Alabama. So he's got to start getting used to this. So maybe the Panthers can turn things around, but I think I hate to say it, but until they get that win, they're going to be prime candidates for sitting at number 1 in terms of bottom 10 for these power rankings. So again, there's your bottom 10. Starts with the Packers at 10, ends with the Panthers at number 1. As always, comment below if you think anything's missing or if you agree with these rankings. But coming up next, there is some stuff also going around in the NFL that I want to touch on with a couple of other things that we didn't get to in our first 2 segments. And that leads into our quick hit segment. Don't go anywhere. As I briefly mentioned, there are a couple of topics that we didn't get to in our first 2 segments, so we're leaving it all for this 3 segment, and we're rapid firing them. Let's go to quick hits, and I want to start still in the NFL and talk about one of the teams that weren't in the top 10 or the bottom 10, and that's the Colts. And obviously the big story was their quarterback, Anthony Richardson. He's now done for the year. He and Indy are opting for shoulder surgery, and honestly, it was a rebuilding year anyway for the Colts. And Jonathan Taylor's probably thinking, I came back for this just to see my guy get injured. The only hype and hope that this franchise had is now done. I mean, like I said, I'm not buying into this Anthony Richardson hype just yet because he has only played 4 games. He's played 4 games, and, yes, he apparently has arm strength. He can hit some incredible throws. I'm not buying it yet until I see the Colts actually win some games. I mean, yes, they were 3-2. Or I should say, yes, they were winning some games. But you also got to remember who they were playing against. So I'm not buying into Anthony Richardson, yes. And plus, we've done this for multiple times now with recent quarterbacks. We've done it with Justin Fields. We've done it with Mac Jones. We had a Zach Wilson hype at some point, okay? So we can't buy into these quarterbacks so quickly. Yes, did he have hype around the draft? Yes, but let's see how they do in an NFL career. This is a completely different game, totally different game. So Anthony Richardson done for the year, which means the Colts might be appearing on our bottom 10 in the future. But I will say more time for Gardner Minshew. And I said before, I'm a big fan of Minshew Mania. So, I not necessarily because he's a good guy, but just he's really entertaining. He's like Uncle Rico. He can throw a football over the mountains. That's why I'm a big fan of him. Moving on, though, the Olympics. We don't really talk much about the Olympics on this podcast, but it's kind of important what happened in the last week or so. The Olympic Committee has added new sports for 2028 when the Olympics come to LA. They come to the United States in 2028. Among them are flag football, baseball, and softball, which has me really excited because now you have either current guys or former guys, players who might be interested. I mean, we've already heard Gronk might want to take part in flag football. Bryce Harper already has some aspirations of playing. So really what I see is that the NFL and the MLB need to have some conversations now about how they can maybe work around this. Because if enough guys in the NFL and in the MLB say, yes, I want to go play in the Olympics, then they need to figure out a way of working around how they can continue to have their season. Because let's face it, with when the Olympics happen at the end of July and the beginning of August, that's when preseason and the NFL really ramps up. And then obviously in baseball, it's the trade deadline, post All-Star break, that kind of stuff. So they gotta find a way to work around that. And really, they should be taking advice from the NHL about how they work around their seasons. Because I think the NHL, they've gone, back and forth. They allowed players to go, then they didn't. Now they're bringing them back. So I think, Roger Goodell, Rob Manfred, they should maybe get on the phone with Gary Bettman or just anyone in, the history of the NHL since they allowed players to go to the Olympics, how they're able to make it work around their regular season. So that'll be something to really monitor. Keep your eyes and ears open for that. In college football, meanwhile, as we go back to football, there's already some hype that's getting died down in the early season. We're almost, we're in the middle of conference season right now. And once we hit November and December, it's really going to ramp up. But for right now, I mean, the hype that we saw at the beginning of the year is now starting to go away. I mean, USC and Caleb Williams, they were all the talk. Then boom, they go down to Notre Dame. Deion Sanders in Colorado, they're the talk of college football. Then they lose a couple. And now, this past week, they blow a 29-0 lead and lose to Stanford in double overtime. That's why you couldn't buy into Deion just yet, because of the program that Colorado had. Yes, it's already a turnaround. And yes, it's already a successful season, but let's not crown them as, automatic, championship favorites. They're going to win a bowl game, this kind of stuff. Let's chill out on that. These kinds of things take time. And then obviously the game of the week for last week had to have been Washington and Oregon. Michael Penix Jr. versus Bo Nix. Washington hanging on after Oregon misses the field goal. Maybe the game of the year. But it's been fun in college football. I mean, you still have your dominants who really haven't moved, and that's Georgia, Michigan, and Ohio State. But behind them, when you get to maybe that fourth spot in the college football playoff, is the Big 12 going to be represented? Is the Pac-12 going to be represented? I would love to see someone from the Pac-12 make it, because that conference is disintegrating after this year. So it'd be kind of cool to see the Pac-12 go out on a high note. Austin Matthews, as we get to the NHL, he's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle because we've seen so many stars, come and go. Like a Connor McDavid and a Nathan McKinnon, even a Connor Bedard, he's gotten lost with them. But what does he do to start the season for the Maple Leafs? 2 hat tricks to begin the year. That's right. He's already got 6 goals on the season. And like we are going to talk about in our next segment, Let's Get Local with Bridgette Proulx, Toronto is a good team this year. And the fact that he's the guy, he's got to push through now. He's got to give them that playoff success. They finally, broke the curse last postseason. They won a playoff series. Now is the time for them to take the next step. And if they're going to have any kind of success, it's got to be some big scoring outputs from Austin Matthews. So we'll see if Matthews, obviously he's not going to get hat tricks at every single game. But if he can maybe lead the league in goals, that would be a big step. That would be a big step for Toronto if they want to make some noise. And then lastly, to end this segment, we got to get to the WNBA finals, because there is a championship on the line, and it was going to be a blowout series from the Aces, but the New York Liberty, they take game 3 back at home. They get to stretch this series over Las Vegas. And you got to keep in mind, going into this, these were 2 hyped up super teams that were put together. And New York was supposedly, structured to take down the reigning champs in the Vegas Aces. When you have Breanna Stewart, Jonquel Jones, and Sabrina Ionescu. But sure enough, they get completely overmatched in Vegas in game 1 and 2. You got Asia Wilson, Kelsey Plum, and now a possibly injured Chelsea Gray dominating things. I think if Gray doesn't play, in that game 4 that opens the door for the Liberty to try and come back in this thing. But let's be honest, the Aces are just so well constructed. They have a former NBA assistant as their head coach in Becky Hammon. I think it's lined up perfectly for the Aces to eventually win this series, whether that be this week or they have to wait for the weekend. That remains to be seen. But that's what I'm expecting out of the WNBA finals, is the Vegas Aces to once again win the WNBA championship. So glad we could go around the rest of the sports world, because now we got to get to a sports city that is dealing with whole kinds of stuff, but in a good and in a bad way. Up next, we're going to get local with our Let's Get Local segment.
This is our city.
So now, as we always do at this time, we go to our local teams and do our Let's Get Local segment of the week. And we're going to keep the Patriots short and sweet, because we got to get to our conversation with Bridgette Proulx to preview the Bruins. And honestly, there's nothing much more to say about the Patriots, as yes, they look better, but still have a ton of issues as they lose in Las Vegas to the Raiders. Two things obviously to look at. In that last drive, Mac Jones, maybe his best throw of the year, and Devontae Parker just doesn't catch the ball. And I'm pretty sure that myself, Nick Fitzstevens, and Andy Hart all said on the postgame show was that Devontae Parker gets blame because he had that one. And then when you go to him postgame, he doesn't take any accountability for it. Like Devontae Parker said, "Oh, it was on my fingertips." Like he basically is shelling the question and he didn't own up to it. Like, are you kidding? That really got the conversation going between the three of us that this is now a team sitting at 1-5. The season is lost. It's without a doubt lost. You're not going to the playoffs. It's just a matter of looking respectable and plan for the future. But really, you need to start finding guys that can actually put in effort and actually care about playing well. You look at last Sunday, Jabril Peppers had a great game. The way he absolutely leveled Devontae Adams and forced the interception from Jelani Tavai. Ezekiel Elliott maybe ran the best that he ran all season and maybe in the past, 12 months or so, including his time with the Cowboys. Kendrick Bourne, he was Mac's favorite target. He made 10 catches of Mac. So you have to find guys that are still invested in this game, because really, the way I look at it, Devontae Parker, he's not invested. Your offensive line is not invested. It's time to start selling off some pieces. It's just so frustrating to see this kind of thing, especially the offensive line just literally letting Max Crosby go get Mac Jones and forcing that safety. The lack of accountability from Devontae Parker, and the issue with all these guys when you see Trent Brown not putting in any effort when he's supposedly one of the best tackles in football, according to PFF, is that Bill Belichick already locked these guys up, okay? They gave Trent Brown more money. They gave Trent Brown more money to end this supposed holdout or whatever. They gave Devontae Parker an extension because he wouldn't shut up about DeAndre Hopkins visiting. He's like, I'm only cared about my team. I don't care about DeAndre Hopkins. So you're locked into these guys, okay? And again, you just don't have the roster talent to compete. So now when you look at probably a top 10 draft pick, you have to start looking at positions. Where does this team need the most help? Obviously, they need athletes. They need over-the-top talent. But really, they might need to be looking for a new quarterback, because to me, about Mac Jones, yes, he played better, but again, he throws another ugly interception. And that one, to me, put the death nail into it that this guy is not the long-term solution. He's just not. Yes, he hit that deep ball to Devontae Parker, but how about the deep ball attempt to Tyquan Thornton? That wasn't even close. And the fact that he's just trying to do too much and he keeps throwing it to the outside. He can't throw a deep ball. He basically can't throw anything 20 yards or more down the field. So honestly, Mac Jones is not the guy. He's just not the guy. And honestly, if this team just continued to not win, if they don't win in the next few weeks, you have to wonder, like, how much longer can you run with Belichick? Because I think everyone agrees that this season should be his last because his time has run his course in New England. He has poor roster construction, which is the focal point of why this team stinks, and I fully believe that. But if you continue to look lifeless against the Bills, and then the week after that against the Dolphins, if you look lifeless against Gardner Minshew and the Colts, like, how much longer can you go with this? Like, really, you cannot do it. So if this team gets to maybe like 1-8 or whatever, then I think you might have to cut ties with them in the middle of the season, because it's clear that guys just aren't buying into whatever kind of message or roster construction he's trying to put together. You know, there will be his big defenders. I mean, you're hearing guys like Teddy Bruschi saying it's time for him to walk away. Guys like Julian Edelman, it's time for him to walk away. You know, not many guys are defending what he has been doing. So I'm sorry, Bill, but your time is up in New England because you continue to just have no idea about how to put a really good competitive roster together. You just keep relying on complimentary guys rather than over-the-top talent. And I stress that again, talent. That is the big key. It's not fun. I mean, all the old heads will be saying, hey, this is what it was like in the 90s before number 12 came onto the field. Yes, and I bet you for those guys who said back then it sucked, this sucks too. This generation is now back in 1995 because this team is not good and they're going to get a high draft pick. I would love to see Caleb Williams in a Patriots uniform. There, I said it. All right, it would be nice because, you know, it's time to get a new man in charge. It's time to get a new quarterback under center and time to get guys who actually care about being a member of the Patriots. So that's kind of where I am with the Patriots. That's all negative, but I'm going to try and turn this thing positive because now I'm going to throw to a really fun conversation I had earlier in the day with Bridgette Proulx. She's one of our Bruins insiders over at WEEI. And we went back and forth. We talked about what it was like and what the preview for the Bruins is for this upcoming season, even though they've had 2 games. So let's throw it to earlier today with my conversation with Bridgette Proulx. So we'll continue our Let's Get Local and talk some Bruins as the season gets underway. And I thought we need an expert because obviously this guy right here, not the biggest hockey person, but we need an expert here. So joining me now, she's part of the Sunday Skate podcast, which you can see on WEEI, wherever you get your podcast. WEEI is one of WEEI's Bruins insiders. Bridgette Proulx now joins us to talk a little bit of hockey. Bridgette, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, Joe, nice to see you.
Yeah, glad we can find.
I haven't seen you. I feel like I haven't seen you around the office in a while.
Yeah,
we have completely different shifts during hockey season.
Oh, for sure. Like when it was Bruin season, it was like one after another. Like once the Red Sox were done, now it's like we barely get to see each other. So glad we can have this conversation and get things going. And obviously things are going to be a little bit different because the season will have already started, but it's early enough. We can still talk a little bit about what the expectations are for the season. So obviously the big thing for the Bruins was they had a historic regular season last year. They go out in the first round to the eventual Eastern champs and the Panthers. And then obviously for people like myself, the big story was that Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, they retire first time in 20 years. Does it kind of feel like a new era considering like what you've been around with in the locker room, training camp, preseason? What are the vibes you're getting from this Bruins roster?
I would say definitely the vibe is that there's a new leadership group. And so you're seeing some of the players that you saw grow up under Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci and Zdeno Chara start taking over those responsibilities of being the more veteran player in the lineup. So talking about Charlie McAvoy, Brendan Carlo, even David Pastrnak, and obviously Brad Marchand being named the captain. Some of those guys having to mature and take on those roles of showing some of the younger kids. And because of the roster turnover, we see a few of the rookies being able to get in the lineup. Johnny Beecher and Matt Patra, as well as Mason Lohrei, potentially going to be coming up at some point this season. He's starting out in Providence, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him during the season at all. So you have guys that are just learning the ropes. And so you need some new leadership to step up and teach some of these new guys. And I spoke to Matt Patra before the season started, and I asked him, did he ever cross paths with Patrice Bergeron or David Krejci? Because as a center, those would be, two guys that it would have been helpful for him to learn under. But he said, no, he hasn't really crossed paths with them. So he's going to have to learn from other guys on the team about the culture. So whether that be Charlie Coyle or Pavel Zacha or whomever, maybe even Brad Marchand, to try to get some of these kids assimilated to the NHL.
Yeah, it definitely, when you look at the cap situation, obviously it had to be young because they went all out last year to get guys at the deadline and then to sign people in the offseason. So they kind of had to do that youth movement. Speaking on that leadership, what have you noticed about how most of the roster has been responding to this new leadership with Marchand as the new captain and some new voices sort of speaking up?
Well, I feel like Marchand was the obvious choice for the captaincy after seeing him last season and the way that he handled when Patrice Bergeron was out and when he was the voice in the room. And from what everybody has been saying, Coach Montgomery included, is that Marchand was already a guy that people listened to, and he spoke up in the locker room and on the bench, and people naturally would just they'd react and respond to his leadership. So no surprise there that he's the captain. And the way that the roster shakes out, I think that the Bruins actually ended up in a better situation than they thought they were going to be, because going into free agency, it seemed like, okay, wow, we have to solve all of these gaps by adding guys that we don't, we can only spend $1 to $2 million on. And then all of a sudden they have these internal solutions in Johnny Beecher and Matt Patra and, potentially Mason Lohrei, like I mentioned. So that relieves some of the cap situation because these guys are coming in on rookie deals. And you see that already happening where they actually brought in a guy as a free agent, Jesper Boquist, and then they waived him because both Beecher and Patra turned out to be ready for the season ahead of schedule for Patra, and kind of also a happy situation that Beecher is ready at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of things were moving around. I know for the casual Bruins fans, they had to get used to a couple of new names. One name that was familiar that was returning, obviously, was Milan Lucic. That was a big story in the offseason of him returning. These first two games, we saw some significant ice time, or at least in some crucial moments. We saw him he was majority third, fourth line, but then there were times he was still playing with like Pasternak and his old teammates like Marchand. Is that something we should expect all season long? And these other acquisitions like Van Riemsdyk and Morgan Geekie, what do you think we can expect from them and all the other new acquisitions?
I'll start with Lucci. And he, by the way, I've had the chance to talk to him a few times already, and he just seems so at peace with the fact that he's back in Boston. He's genuinely just so happy to be back where he started out. And I think that he's in a good situation right now on the fourth line because he has two quicker guys next to him, right? He's a little bit past his prime, but then he has Johnny Beecher and Jacob Lauko to really push the pace of that line. And it makes him play faster than maybe he would have with other guys that are not as young or played a different style than those two. So that line has really been formidable with the forechecking, and they've been able to set the tone energy wise. A lot of times you'll see them take the first shift or an early shift in the game and set the tone right from there. So that has been their most consistent line. They really haven't messed with that even in practice. This most recent practice on Monday, they also kept that line together. You did see Lucci play up with Pasta, but that mostly happens on situations where they're coming off of a power play, or it usually comes off a penalty kill, right? So special teams sometimes dictates them having to switch up and say, because Lucic, Patra, and Pasternak are all guys that don't spend much of any time on the penalty kill. So those guys were all rested, and so he threw them all out there together. So, you might see the odd shift where Lucic and Pasternak are out there together, but by and large, he'll be getting time with that fourth line. And it's been a strong fourth line from the preseason and in the first two games. And then You asked about the other acquisitions. So James Van Riemsdyk is someone that if you've been following the Bruins for a long time, since Van Riemsdyk entered the NHL, you know that he kind of has been a Bruins killer. He's been really good against the Bruins. So you maybe were thinking of him
The
as
opposite
somebody
of a
that's
fan favorite. Opposite of fan
yeah,
favorite.
but like he's a nice enough guy. He's not a pest, but like he scores in such important situations against the Bruins in the past, and he's always right there in front of the net and taking away the goalie's eyes and scoring, you know, those easy layup goals off a rebound. Well, guess what? Now he's doing that for your team, so you're happy. He's great on the first power play unit out in front of the net, so he brings that net front presence. He's a big body. Like when I'm in the locker room and he walks by, I'm like, I feel like a child in comparison because he's so big. And so he can bring
We
all
do feel like that with most of the players.
yeah, I feel like that a
It's a
lot
lot of
around
looking
Brendan.
up.
Yeah, most of them. Brendan Carlo also makes me feel like that because he's I think 6'5", but so he can. The good thing about Van Riemsdyk is he can play in your top six. But also, if you want to rotate him to the third line, you can do that. And we saw the Bruins practice lines have him in the third line this Monday because they rotated Matt Patra to a second line center role and Charlie Coyle back to the third line center role with Trent Frederick and James Van Riemsdyk. So the good thing about him is you can play him up and down the lineup, and you can also play him on the power play. So he's pretty versatile and was added relatively cheap because he's on the back end of his career. He's not, you know, as fast as he used to be, but he's still really good at the role they want him to play.
Yeah, so it really helped with those 2 power play goals the other night against Nashville. Definitely big on that one. You keep mentioning the name Matt Patra, and for those who are kind of re-entering the Bruins side of the season, they're like, oh, who's this Patra guy? I hadn't heard of him before. Haven't really heard about him in Providence. So can you explain to those who might not know about Matt Patra, what is the hype surrounding this young player, and is he really like this big replacement center, you know, the Patrice Bergeron replacement that everyone thinks he might be?
I think so to start with the hype, right? He created his own hype this preseason just by, you know, having a relatively low bar coming in, being a 19-year-old and having all of this time left to develop. And I don't think he was originally part of their plan this season. That's why they brought in free agents like Morgan Geekie and Jesper Boquist and Patrick Brown, who could play center and fill in those gaps that Bergeron and Krejci left. And then all of a sudden, he comes into the preseason and he's your most effective center. And he plays 5 out of 6 games and he looks good in every one of them and has multiple preseason goals. And he's just making this case for himself. Like, you can't send him back down. I know he's 19. But he also is in the situation where he's coming from juniors in the OHL with Guelph, and he is too young to be sent down to Providence. So you either have to send him down to juniors, where he already was the second leading point scorer last season and had an incredible year. And I personally think his ceiling has been reached there, and that he would get so much more out of playing in the NHL the whole year than, you know, going back down to work on what, like, he can clearly be a playmaker at that level. Now you got to see if he can be a playmaker in the NHL. And I think through the first 2 games of the season, you've really seen the vision that he has. I would say, was probably their most effective center in both of the regular season games as well. At least 5-on-5, he was making a big impact. He makes some really spectacular passes, and he's been compared, his skill set has been compared to David Krejci. So, and we all know how good of a center David Krejci was, making the all-centennial team of one of the top 12 forwards in Bruins history in 100 years. Like, if you can get anywhere near that skill set of Krejci in Patra, then you're really setting yourself up for an easy transition, which it happened quicker than Sweeney and a lot of people expected, but he's here and he's ready to play. And I believe the hype. I've had a chance to talk to him several times. He's really nice. I did a one-on-one interview with him for about 10 minutes the day before the season. And I just love his demeanor and his just his general attitude on how to take this all on. And he doesn't seem overwhelmed. And I feel like he has the right mindset to adapt to the challenges. And he's a very smart hockey player.
There's always that one gem that the Bruins find over the past couple of years, and Poitras might be that guy.
Yeah, he's a second round pick. They didn't have a first round pick in that draft, and they pick him in the second round, above some other centers that were actually kind of ranked higher than him in terms of where they might go in the draft. But Don Sweeney and the Bruins scouts selecting him, and it is gonna pay off for them based on what we've seen so far. I think his ceiling is really high.
Yeah, as long as he doesn't peak too early, and plus he's got that great veteran leadership around him. Outside of Poitras, you also mentioned Beecher and a couple of other young guys. Are there any other young guys who might be on the current active roster, or maybe down in Providence or in the juniors, that fans can really get excited for?
I would say in terms of like in Providence, the players that are closest are Mason Lohrei, who got a lot of time in the preseason and just barely didn't make the final cut. And I think was under heavy consideration to make that cut. He's another tall defenseman. He's 6'4". He's kind of like a big, lanky defenseman. They had him playing in the preseason right next to Brendan Carlo. So that would be a really big second pair if you ever were to put them together. The problem is it was easier for the team to not have to waive other players and keep them and not expose them to the potential of another team grabbing them than it was to just send Lohrei down. And he for sure could benefit from spending more time in Providence. So he's somebody that when he comes up, he's going to be exciting to watch. I'd say he's probably the closest to a call up. And in the, you don't want this to happen. You have two really good goalies, but in the event that maybe one of them is injured for a little bit of time, Brendan Bussey is the goalie that's in Providence, and he had a really great preseason as well. He had some saves that were like highlight reel saves for an NHL goalie, and you're thinking, wow, the Bruins are really deep in that position. They have this starting goalie in Providence who could come play in the NHL, but there's just two guys in front of him that are so good that you're not gonna get a look at him unless somebody gets hurt. So obviously the Bruins not hoping for that, but he's a prospect that kind of makes things interesting at the goalie position because kind of gives you maybe a little bit more flexibility. I'm not saying this year, but maybe in the off season to trade a goalie if that's what you decide you need to do, to maybe get another winger, because there's going to be a lot of really good free agent wingers coming available. So those two, I would say, are probably two to get excited about. Maybe not this year for Bussey, but I think Lohrei is someone we can expect to see at some point.
Yeah, at some point, as you said, via injury or anything like that, they'll definitely find themselves on the active roster. Now from off the ice, let's get onto the ice. Obviously, it's only 2 games, and I don't think it's fair to say, oh, they're going to break their own record like they did last year. So what do you think are fair expectations for this team, considering they might be a little bit motivated from having that record and then losing in 7 games in the very first round? What do you think the expectations are for Jim Montgomery, and what do you think is a proper, maybe a floor and a ceiling for where this Bruins team can go?
Joe, they're going to go undefeated. They're going to go undefeated this year.
2-0 so far.
They're going to break their record. Yep. So Pasternak's going to have 82 goals. And I'm just kidding, but
1 goal per game would be pretty good.
Off to a great start, and really, I think the pressure is off them a little bit after last season, knowing that the turnover that they had. And I feel like teams are not giving them the respect that they might actually deserve, because they are thinking, oh, well, without Bergeron and Krejci, this team is not going to be the same. But this is still a playoff team. I think that this is, at the minimum, I think this is a wild card team. And potentially, so they're not finishing first, more than likely. I think Toronto has a good enough team. I picked Toronto to finish first in their division. But I mean, once you make the playoffs, all bets are off. We saw it last season. So if you can get yourself in, even if it's in a wild card spot, then you're you have everything in your own hands. Obviously, you don't want to pull Carolina in the first round because they have a really good team on paper this year. But I actually think the Bruins could finish second in the division after Toronto, because some of the other teams in the division also took a step back. So Tampa Bay has some roster flaws right now, dealing with a similar situation of cap issues. Florida, probably, on paper, not as good as the Bruins, though we saw what they could do, and they still have Kachuk. So things are different. But in terms of in the division, I could see them finishing second or third. But I really do think this is a playoff team. So nothing less than making the playoffs for them this year.
Yeah, I think everyone's looking at everyone who left rather than everyone who came in. As you say, if you lose Bergeron, Krejci, Hathaway, Orlov, all those guys, that will make it like really worse, especially for fans. Last thing I want to ask for you real quick is, obviously this is a big season because it's the centennial season for the Bruins. We saw the release of the top Bruins players. We had big ceremonies. I know you're going to be covering it pretty much all season long. What are you looking forward to most as the Bruins celebrate their 100th season as a member of the NHL?
Well, I was at the first game. They had the gold carpet where all of the legends came up, and we had a chance to talk to a lot of them, including Bergeron and Krejci, Tim Thomas. It was nice for me, it was the first time meeting a lot of those guys, because they're generations before. And I started covering the team. This is my 4th season. So obviously I met Krejci and Bergeron and talked to them on many occasions, but some of the other guys, not so much. And so that was neat. And to see all of them and how much pride they had to be part of this celebration and part of this organization, really kind of gives you the idea of just how strong the culture has been in Boston for so long. The celebration itself was it was perfectly done. And there was a lot of energy, a lot of fans there really supporting and enjoying the ceremony that they did. I think they did a very good job rolling out the legendary 100, the centennial team, the first game of the season with all of the different media graphics and videos that they put together. So that was really cool. It was kind of one of those moments where I'm sitting there and I'm like, wait a minute, like this is crazy. Like I'm here covering this, and like I know you probably have had similar moments, Joe. Like when you're a kid, you're like, I was watching Tim Thomas play, and like that's how come I got into this business, was some of these guys, and now I'm talking to them, and now I'm like watching this incredible ceremony, and I'm like, oh wait, I do this for a job now. This is crazy, because I would do this for free. So it was kind of just one of those like pinch yourself moments. It went so smoothly, and I'm excited to see what else happens throughout the season. New jerseys, which have grown on me. At first I didn't like them all that much, with the sparkly gold, which, don't get me wrong, I love sparkles, but I wasn't sure it really made sense on the Bruins jerseys, but they've grown on me.
Yeah, they're trying to make you focus on the old school logo rather than all the glitter and the glitz.
But you can't, you always got to focus on the glitter. So yeah, it's been nice to be a part of, and you kind of get that old and new sense, because you have all the legends hanging out around the team, including some that are just recently. Like, it must have been weird for Bergeron and Krejci to go watch the game rather than play in it. And so you get the old, and then this injection of life from some of these younger players, and some of the core players that are getting more responsibility. You just kind of feel that the youthfulness of the team it could be something that helps bring energy.
Yeah, I was gonna just side note really quickly. It must be good for those legends to see such a young team go out there on the ice and so far win their first 2 games at home, would you say?
Yeah, so that's always the main thing, right? You have a huge ceremony of all of your best players that are still, with us and able to show up. You don't want to disappoint them. You want to have a good game. You want to win that game. And they did. So good on them. They gave them a win to watch, because I mean, you don't want to have Bobby Orr come all the way and then you lose in front of him and everybody else. But No, they won, and it was an entertaining game. I will say that first period, I was sitting there like, this is good hockey. So I was pleasantly surprised with just how well things were clicking from that first period, and obviously still so much to get better at throughout the season. But the Bruins are kind of lucky. They're starting off again, and I think this works in their favor with younger players. They're starting off with a somewhat weaker schedule. So they're playing against Chicago, who had Connor Bedard, but the reason why they got Connor Bedard is because they were terrible
They
last
were
year.
really bad.
So like that doesn't solve all of their problems, even though he was really good. And I certainly have bought into the hype on him after seeing him play. But and then they play Nashville, which isn't, that they're not one of the tougher teams in the league. And now they go out on the road to play against San Jose next. And we had picked San Jose to finish last this year. Anaheim, also not a team that is considered to be a strong team, to put it nicely. So probably good that.
Oh, you can be unfiltered here. If you want to say they suck, they suck.
Probably good to be playing those teams early in the year in order to acclimate players, try a few different line combinations, see, just kind of have an easier foot in the door for some of these guys.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And just really quickly before we let you plug all your podcasts and all that, did you agree with the all Centennial team?
I mean, a lot of it is very easily agreeable, right? So I feel like the toughest was goalie, because they've had way more than two legendary goalies in the franchise's history, right? So obviously Tim Thomas has won a Stanley Cup with the Bruins. Scott was on the selection committee, our other Bruins reporter. And there is a video, there's like an hour-long special that the Bruins put together of like the 20 people that were in the room making the selections. And Scott, like, you hear Scott pipe up in the background and like make his case for Tim Thomas. And I really do think there is a case to be made for him. I don't think anyone that made the team, you can really knock them though. Like, those are all really good players. Some of them are just from so long ago that people might not really know. And it was nice to see that everybody thought that Pastrnak was somebody that should make the team, because I know he hasn't finished his career here yet, and a lot of the other guys had, but he's very clearly going to be one of the top goal scorers, point scorers. He's going to be a top of a lot of offensive categories for the Bruins by the time he finishes his career. He probably will finish it with Boston based on the extension he just signed, and I think he would like to spend a lot of his career, if not the whole career, here. So he definitely deserved to make it this 100 years rather than him get put on and for the 200th team. I mean, we're not going to be around. He's not going to be around. So nice to see him get on this one.
Yeah, I definitely am going to have to keep track of those emotions for you during all these ceremonies. Make sure you have everything in check when you're talking to Bergeron and Tim Thomas and all of them.
Yeah. I
gotta watch you, and I gotta monitor for you for that. Bridgette, thanks for taking the time. Before you go, talk about the skate podcast with WEEI, yourself and Scott McLaughlin. What can people expect if they tune in?
So we're in our third season, I want to say. Doesn't matter. We took over. It actually used to be run by our boss, Ken Laird. But then he, got promoted and didn't have time to do it. So me and Scott and Brian, my name is Bridgette Proulx, Scott McLaughlin, Brian DeFelice, we took it over and have been doing it ever since. So this year we're putting up 3 episodes per week, usually Mondays and Wednesdays, and then on the weekend, TBD, usually Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, because I am incredibly busy on the weekends, and so is Scott. So because I broadcast college hockey on Friday and Saturday. So yeah, that's our posting schedule. We have a Twitter that you can follow. We also post video versions now on the WEI YouTube under the Skate Pod playlist, so you can watch it there or listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the spiel. And then it hasn't started yet, but once the NFL ends, which is a while away, we're not talking about till February, we do have a Sunday morning show called Sunday Skate with me, Scott McLaughlin, and Andrew Raycroft. So That's still a while away, but you also might hear Scott or I on some of the shows filling in for, just kind of like a Bruins correspondent.
Yeah, for sure. I think some of us want that Patriots and football season to end pretty soon, the way it's
Yeah, you
going.
know what? Maybe the Sunday skate will start early this year. I don't know.
We'll set a Thanksgiving deadline. If it's that, we might need to put you guys on early. Bridgette Proulx, part of the skate team, Bruins correspondent for WEEI. Thank you for taking the time, and we'll be looking forward to watching your stuff all season long for the Bruins.
Thank you, Joe.
Special thanks again to Bridgette Proulx. Make sure you tune into her and Scott McLaughlin on the Skate Podcast via WEEI and Odyssey. It's a lot of fun to listen to her. Super glad she came on the podcast. But now we're going to shift to our LOL moment of the week. And this week, again, we're going to stay in the NFL. We're actually going to go to Monday Night Football because there is some camera shots that are going around of this Chargers fan who is basically going through all the fields right now as the Chargers and Cowboys were going back and forth. And you can see that it looks really over the top. You know, there's tears, there's near tears, there's full-on excitement, and it's got everyone wondering, was this a plant by either the Chargers, ESPN, or the NFL to show that there are fans of the LA Chargers? Because I'll put it to you like this. I don't know if you watched the game on Monday night or if you've been to SoFi Stadium for a Chargers game, but that crowd was very heavily on Dallas's side for that one. There were big cheers when Dallas had some big gains and they took the lead, and then Stephon Gilmore got that game-winning interception. It was a very loud crowd in SoFi that supposedly is the home of the Chargers. But we know this about LA fans. We know that they don't show up. We know, as annoying as they are, that Cowboys fans show up. So maybe it was the NFL's way of showing that, hey, there are some Chargers fans that go to these games, and these Chargers fans are actually invested. But I don't know if I would have picked this lady as your plant. I think you have to go for someone who might have actually knows football. I don't know if this woman, I might need to get her on the phone or not, just to say, do you know what a first down is? Do you know all this kind of stuff? Because let's face it, LA is the home of Hollywood. You know, where they are in Englewood is right outside of Hollywood, a couple miles away from the Hollywood sign. So there's no doubt in my mind that there might have been some actors that have maybe gotten contacted by the league to maybe be a plant and just be this kind of fan. I will say, if they didn't go over the top or was on pins and needles, they were, it wasn't a convincing fan to me. Okay. A convincing fan, you basically go to any sort of crowd shot. If they wanted to get a good plant and a good actor to be a Chargers fans, go to these diehard teams, go to Arrowhead for Kansas City, go to MetLife, maybe with the Jets or the Giants, go to Philly, to Lincoln Financial Field with the Eagles, and take notes from them. Take notes for them rather than just saying, okay, we need an actor to play a football fan. What do you know about the Chargers? They're in LA. All right, you're hired. That's basically how the conversation went. So we are having some fun at this. So I guess you can put it on the fan and the league for maybe putting a plant there, but I think for now I'm going to give it to the lady. This Chargers fan, who I put in quotations, Chargers fan, who took the social media by storm with all her over-the-top reactions for the LA Chargers, has gotten herself into this week's LOL moment of the week. And just like that, we are done here with episode 90 of Let Me Speak. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Make sure you follow me on social media at Joe Braverman PBP on Twitter or X, Joe Braverman on Instagram and on Facebook. And don't forget to follow this podcast as well on Facebook and Instagram. Just search Let Me Speak. podcast. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time for episode 91 of Let Me Speak. Later.